Hey everyone, welcome to another Angry Artist podcast. For today's topic, I really wanted to talk about and go back to composition. Now, composition is a finicky subject because everyone really has their own interpretation of what a good composition is. Now, from a previous audio, I talked about how no matter what the rules are, you want to tell the message. However you want to tell your message, it has to work in your composition. Now, I've also mentioned there are some universal rules when it comes to how a viewer would interpret a scene or an illustration, and I'm going to be talking about a few of these traits today. Now, as with before, I talked about how you need to ask yourself the right questions when it comes to any aspect of art. I generally find that the artists who are extremely good will always have the right decisions because they ask the right questions. So let's bring that into the realm of composition. Now, bear in mind that everyone has their own way of approaching composition, but these are some of the questions I like to ask myself and really get it down before I even draw on the canvas. So number one is, if I were to film this, how far would the camera be to get your message across? Now, it sounds like a very simple question, but it actually solves a ton of issues. In our generation, we grew up on a lot of cinematography and such, and a lot of those concepts and interpretations apply to artwork. Even though perhaps a master artist like Bouguereau would not have that type of resource back in his days. They kind of knew about how to get their message across based on how far or how close you want your viewers to be, or the camera in this case. So for instance, if you are trying to sell the idea that it's a vast desert and it's very dangerous, there's not a lot of things going on, then perhaps maybe a close-up shot to a person's face would not work very well. In that case, common sense will prevail and you would probably do a long shot or a very long shot. Generally speaking, when it comes to doing illustrations with creatures and human beings or otherwise, the size of your character in the frame will tell the story. So again, in this case, in this example, where you want to show a vast environment, perhaps having a character that is covering most of the frame would not work very well. Now, if you want to show a bit of emotion, then maybe having a close-up shot would be great, a portrait, if you will, and that will really accentuate and put the focal point on, of course, the person's face. Now, if you want to go deeper, you can always go with something like zooming in on the eyes and just showing one part of the face. Again, common sense prevails when it comes to these things, but you want to really ask yourself these questions. Now, camera shots and such, okay, we established that. Now, what's the next step? Now, if you've listened to my other audios, you would get the idea that I value values a lot, or brightness in that case. You want to really establish your dominant key. Now, what I mean by that is, if you were to establish an average brightness to your composition, what would it be? Now, this will determine the atmosphere even more. For instance, what people mean by high-key composition is when your compositions are very bright. It means that you don't have a lot of darks, it doesn't look like a horror movie, if that matters. And generally speaking, we gravitate towards daylight, that type of thing, because it makes us happy. And that sort of emotion is pretty important. Now, on the flip side, if you were to go the opposite end, if you want to make, let's say, a horror game or a horror movie, perhaps you want to have the average key to be very dark. So if you watch movies like It, or maybe plays the Silent Hill series, you'll notice that a lot of the scenes are very dark because, again, when it comes to creating emotion and relating that to experiences in life, we do get a bit more scared of the unknown. So if you walk into a dark basement, we would be scared a lot more than if we go outside in bright daylight. Now, of course, that is a very simplistic way and a very extreme way of looking at it. There are a lot of nuances when it comes to determining value key. So, for instance, an overcast sky is fairly medium toned. Now, you could adjust a little bit, even the tiny bit of the value, and you would end up either having a very nice overcast sky, or you would have a very solemn, very foggy, very dangerous environment, a la something like a game like PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds. Again, observe and experience life and really bring those experiences into your artwork, as a lot of these will be determined by your interpretation of reality. Now, the third point overlaps with other audios I have, but it's the idea of a mood color. Now, again, similar to having an average value key, you want to determine what's the influence color of your entire piece. For example, if you have a very grayish blue, perhaps that creates a more solemn mood than if you have a bright red alert type of color that is the average for your entire piece, your dominant color. I won't go over too much of it because I've talked about it before, but feel free to listen to my other color theory audios to really get a more in-depth discussion on it. So finally, we go into the final question. What are the elements of your piece? You've established basically the hardest parts by now of your composition. You know what you are limited by based on the message that you want to send out. So let's say you want to do a horror movie. Of course, you already established the boundaries of where you can go before it doesn't feel like the horror movie. So all you have to do now is really sort of place your subject matter into the piece. Now, since we've already established the fact that we have a certain camera angle or a camera shot that we want to use, then all that it takes is, okay, what do I actually have to draw? I honestly think that is probably the easiest part of drawing the artwork because, again, ideas always matter first. And your ideas are framed within this universe that you've created based on the questions that you've answered in these previous criteria. So again, for instance, if you are doing a horror movie, you know exactly how dark your piece has to be. You know exactly what you want to show. So for example, if you want to show the It clown, Pennywise, then you would probably have him take most of the frame to show just how horrifying he is. And then your colors might be very blue, it might be very red depending on what the scene is, just something that will really accentuate that danger. And again, all you have to do is now place the subject matter. Now the lighting matters too, of course, but the lighting is only to show and make a reasonable argument to have your previous criteria substantiated. So that sounds a little bit confusing, so I'm going to reiterate. you've established everything else. Now the lighting is just there to make it reasonable, to explain why your scene looks the way it is. So again, for instance, if you have a very blue scene, then of course you need to justify it by having a blue lighting. And if you have a very low-key, very dark scene, then perhaps your lighting should be a bit weaker. And again, people will not stop you if the lighting is a bit off, just to push that narrative even more. Again, ideas over everything. Anyways, thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.